said before many times how trusting government with the most important social functions of dispute resolution, arbitration, providing for the public's safety is so dangerous. It is so destructive. It is so contrary to the legitimate goals and hopes and wants and needs of the people to trust a violent gang of thugs known as government with these critical functions, with the resources, and what's worse, with the monopoly. When you say, government, please protect me from rapists and murderers and thieves, and you are turning to, at best, murderers and thieves, if not rapist excusers, to provide these functions, not only do they provide horribly inadequate, destructive services, but they prevent you from competing. They make it more difficult for you. And I don't mean just by taking your money and saying, well, we're allocating these resources. No, they make it illegal. They forcibly stop you from competing with their monopoly. But using the government to go after crime as an individual crime is like using cancer to go after flatulence. Yeah, get a little perspective here, people. Of all the crimes that government commits, the crimes committed by individuals are insignificant, but not a problem to be ignored. And yet, as we see from the Detroit Free Press, here's the headline: as Detroit rape kits sit untested, justice for victims is denied. Really? Think about it for a second. Nearly 5 years after the discovery of 11,000 abandoned rape evidence kits in a Detroit police warehouse sparked outrage, only about 2,000 of the kits have undergone DNA testing, allowing serial rapists to remain free and in some cases commit more attacks. All the kits are finally expected to get tested this year because the state legislature appropriated $4 million to send them to private labs. Yeah. Holy shit. Are you kidding me? It's got this is what it's come to? They're not even pretending to keep up the sham anymore. But hold on a second. How much money do you think the city of Detroit spends on law enforcement? What do you think those resources go to? Busting pot smokers? Catching all those dangerous drug dealers? Oh, going after tax evaders and code violators? To the point where they can't keep the freaking lights on in the streets, and now you have more crime as a result. Oh, but that's more of an excuse to get you dependent on government. Yeah. Fortunately, in Detroit, we see there are also community organizations that are stepping up to fill the gaps. Only now that the monopoly of law enforcement is so pitifully retreated in that city as to make that a viable alternative. As important as the DNA is, testing alone is only a part of the equation in getting justice for the hundreds of people who have been victimized and getting dangerous sexual predators off the streets. Testing on the kits has already produced. Now, this is the best part. This is really, you know what? I'm sorry. I should not have said best. This is the most disgusting part. When you turn to government for justice services, this is what you get. Testing on the kits has already produced more than 500 hits with named suspects on a national DNA database. But police and prosecutors haven't even begun to follow up on more than 150 of those leads. Now, do a little math here. Testing on 2,000 kits, 500 hits. That means they've already got these people. And I can tell you, this is from my experience in jail. I refused to take a DNA test and ended up in solitary confinement as a result, ended up having to give in after several days of torture. But no, they have DNA on record for pretty much everyone who's been arrested in the United States, or at least been processed and booked in for the last, I don't know how many years. But there's a huge database out there of people that get arrested for little things and get released. 500 hits. That means of the 2,000 tested, 1 in 4 resulted in a hit that they could charge someone with, or in a lead that they could pursue because it's tied to an individual. And 150 of them, they're just sitting out there. Oh no. What are we going to do? We're going to keep patrolling and pulling people over for speeding and swerving. We're going to do traffic stops and make sure your car is registered properly and you've paid off the state. But if you've raped someone, forget about it. No, 150 of you guys, you just rapists out on the street. We know who you are. We know where you live. We've arrested you before, but and we've got positive evidence now to link you to another rape. I mean, your DNA ends up in the wrong body. Pretty clear evidence. And yet, this is what you get when you turn to government. The reasons for the delay are varied. Only on TV crime shows can investigators get a DNA hit and rush out and charge a suspect, officials say. Oh, really? No. So this is the excuse. Oh, you think law enforcement is easy? You think it's like what you see on television? Oh, no. We are far less incompetent than any of those actors even. Yes. No. This is just like but they it gets out there. This is the expectation that people have, and they should have. They should have this expectation for law enforcement, for public safety. Is that it should be at least as good as the fantasy on television where it's always the good cops going after the bad guys and, you do a test in a crime lab. Yeah, and you go get the guy. As opposed to, just let him go and roam and commit more rapes. Yeah, sure. In real life, and particularly in cases dating back a decade or more, as many of the thousands of discovered rape kits are, once evidence is tested, victims must be found, witnesses must be interviewed or re-interviewed, and old police files must be located or reconstructed. Oh, sorry, we let it go too long, so we're just going to have to let it go. But do you see what he's saying? If we actually did our job when we were supposed to, it would have been easier because everything would have been fresh. We could have pursued these cases. But no. Turning to government means that those resources allocated for justice and public safety will not go to serving the needs of the people. They will go to enforcement of non-crimes, for drug dealers, for drug consumers, for people who are driving without paying off the state for their bounty of their license and registration, for people who go 5 miles over the speed limit, for people looking suspicious on the street corner. Yeah, because that's what fighting crime is in the eyes of a politician who'd rather serve special interests than the people. And because you watch television, because you think that it's all hunky-dory and you can trust government, you are that much less safe as a result. And today is Tuesday, April 22nd, 2014. You're listening to the Adam vs. the Man podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. We got a huge stack of stories today, but we also have a very exciting guest that's joining us. Fellow military veteran, Army actually, Officer Bill Bupert of zerogov.com. And there are very few people who I agree with on everything, who I actually really enjoy getting deep into these issues with, and Bill Bupert is one of them. We've hung out several times at a variety of events around, mostly in Arizona. Every time I go to Arizona, I get to see him, and he's one of these guys who's just the quiet background intellectual activist. His website really great. I hope you'll check it out. And he's the one. The subtitle of his book, I'm trying to find this here, is oh man, I wish. Oh, here, let's see, buy my book. And I really do want to promote this. It's the book is based on his writings at zerogov.com. It's called, the title is Zero Gov: Limited Government, Unicorns, and Other Mythological Creatures. Yes. And just it's not just his wit and his humor and everything that he brings to this conversation, but really the intellectual depth, maybe of the guy residing somewhere undisclosed in the high desert of Arizona. But today we're going to be bringing him on to talk about a new series on his website called Badged Serial Killers: The Growing Murder Culture of Cops. And it's a 5-part series. Part 1, dogs and other animals. And I've nearly experienced this myself firsthand, but everybody's seen the videos of cops shooting dogs and heard the stories of how when they, how cops are, and especially when, it was a big deal when they were raiding dispensaries here in LA, right? Every dispensary that had a dog, anytime there was a raid, fucking shot right away. Part 2, children, part 3, women, part 4, the elderly, part 5, the disabled. And, America is going through this, I don't know, kind of a process of realization about the nature of the police state. And there really is been a dramatic shift over the last, I don't know how far back you want to go, couple of decades, but certainly in the last maybe 5 years, it's accelerated in the militarization of the police force. Literally the amount of military gear going down to local police forces for no good reason, the change in attitude, the change in the laws, the protection from accountability, and to really encompass all of that, I think it's great to take this perspective. And because Bill wrote this incredible series, I want to have him on, and we're going to have this conversation, and we're going to take some calls after this on this theme as well. If you want to Skype me, Skype Adam Kokesh, ADAMKOKESH. Don't send me any contact requests. All you got to do is put in why you want to be on the show, why you want me to call you and bring you on, or if you just have a question, you can just chat it to me that way, and I'll read it and answer it on the air if it's good. Anyway, Bill Bubert is coming up, joining us in just 17 minutes. And if you want to sponsor the show, please let us know. If you want to volunteer and get involved in production, especially field work, please send us an email. And what else? Let's see. If you have music you'd like to hear during the pre-show, sorry we didn't have the sound on earlier today. You get to watch me jamming out in my tank top to nothing. I don't know if that's more entertaining. If you see Adam dancing to music, it's just painful. But if you see Adam dancing to no music, it's like, well, it's painful for me. Anyway, please share the show with people that you think it would benefit from hearing this message and this perspective. That's how we grow. That's how we grow the movement and bring people in. And if the show isn't something that you want to share, let me know why. As always, with all of that, send your love mail to adam@adamversustheman.com. And don't forget to support the show by going to adamversustheman.com/invest. Please consider becoming a monthly supporter. That's really our bread and butter and how we keep the lights on around here. From antiwar.com, the U.S.'s invasion of Africa that nobody knows about. And you hear a headline like this, and if it wasn't from John Glazer at antiwar.com, I would be like, whoa, wait a second. The American government is invading Africa too? Oh, crap. What is this I don't know about? What exaggeration is this? And I got some bad news, folks. This is really not much of an exaggeration. The U.S. is assembling the rudiments of imperial infrastructure throughout Africa, and hardly anybody knows about it. Hardly anybody knows about it because the government and military refuse to divulge much of U.S. foreign policy towards Africa. You see, U.S. foreign policy is really none of your business. The Obama administration has been slowly and very quietly peppering the U.S. military throughout the continent and putting hundreds of millions of dollars into the pockets of government contractors to build the necessary infrastructure for a permanent U.S. military presence. Washington has been increasing its support for African regimes, many with records of human rights violations, and boosting efforts to train African militaries to keep them dependent on the Pentagon. The U.S. is training and equipping militaries in countries including Algeria, Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, Morocco, Niger, Nigeria, Senegal, and Tunisia, not to mention operations in Libya, Somalia, Uganda, Kenya, Djibouti, et al. Yeah, the global war on terror has provided a wonderful excuse for a lot of this, but this is something much deeper in terms of the opportunity that this represents. And if you think about the core motivation for American imperialism of money, power, the various competing interests, and it's important in an analysis like this to remember that the government is not a single mind. The government is a large group of criminals. It is a gang of thugs. It is a lot of different people with a lot of different motivations. Some are fooled into thinking that they can do the right thing working with government, and some people can actually do good work. And of course, yes, it's important to point out that there really is, no such thing as good government. Government can do good things, but it's the same thing as like theft. There's no such thing as a good theft. Of course, it's going to be good for somebody, but it's still wrong. And in Africa, I think what we're seeing here, and it could be wrong, but if you look at the historical patterns of American militarism, imperialism, where did it go? Where were the guns pointed? Where did the money go? And And there are a couple of different factors in this, right? If you're coming from the military industrial complex sector, your objective is to get the American government to spend as much money on the military and equipment as possible, right? So you're looking for any excuse, and says, where is there an excuse to spend money? And the global war on terror, I mean, it's never ending and it's everywhere. And it's a tactic. Oh yeah, we can put bases all around the world and we got to have drones to cover the planet. Yeah, so on and so forth. So it's a great excuse. And I don't think that has any particular relevance as to where that effort is directed, right? Because that's like always a continuous factor, at least as it has been since World War II when Eisenhower warned us about it, or after World War II when Eisenhower warned us about it in his farewell address as president. But if you, again, to look at the historical pattern, American imperialism in the Middle East, throughout the world, it's always been in places where there was oil, or if you look at like the banana wars in Central America, there were economic opportunities with the major corporations that were behind it then. And back then it was Major General Smedley Butler, who one of the most decorated Marines in military history, who was taught about in boot camp to every Marine. Every single Marine, knows the name Smedley Butler as the guy who won 2 medals of honor and fought in all the World War I and all the banana wars and so on. They don't know that he came home and wrote a book called War is a Racket, in which he described himself as a high-class muscle man for big business. And he said that what he did was make those countries safe for American fruit companies like Dole and United Fruit or whatever. Anyways, there were corporate interests behind that. Now that's now this is going back to World War I, when the fossil fuel industry was not exactly as dominant as it is today. So maybe the food industry, various other corporate factors had a greater grip on government. Now oil and gas, and you wonder in Africa too. There's a lot of this has to do with mineral rights, and a lot of the mining that's going on in Africa. And now it seems like there's a certain level of exploitation possible because there is an American, and calling it an American corporate interest really isn't fair. International superclass, multinational corporate interests controlling the American government and the banking class is probably a lot more accurate here. But you have an increasing economic level, or a level of economic organization in Africa. You have the minerals that have obviously always been there, but you have new technologies to exploit them. And in the computer age, and I know this is nothing particularly new, you have a much greater demand for a lot of these rare minerals and some of the precious stones and other things that are in the ground in Africa. So there's a whole other set of motivations behind this. But got to get back to the story, because this gets good. I mean, you might be thinking, oh, Adam, you're just touching that's imperial infrastructure. That's an exaggeration. No, calling it imperial infrastructure is actually downplaying it. Calling it an invasion, by some definitions of invasion, totally accurate. Reporter Nick Turse has been at the forefront of reporting on America's gradual infiltration of Africa. He writes this week about, among other things, the difference between what military officials say about Africa policy when asked by reporters and what they tell U.S. contractors looking to do business for taxpayer money. To journalists, the Pentagon maintains that we're hardly doing anything in Africa beyond humanitarian assistance. Now, by the way, I have to call you out, John, antiwar.com. We are hardly doing anything in Africa. You mean the government. It's an important distinction. The American people don't even know what's going on here. Got to get away from that statist collectivist language. To the military-industrial complex, they say America is at war in Africa and is looking for a permanent footprint throughout the continent. Well, we didn't invade, but we're at war. Holy shit. Yeah, there had to be an invasion in there somewhere. Captain Rick Cook, the chief of U.S. Africa Command's Engineer Division, was addressing an audience of more than 50 representatives of some of the largest military engineering firms on the planet, and this reporter. The contractors were interested in jobs, and he wasn't pulling any punches. Quote, the 18 months or so that I've been here, we've been at war the whole time. We are trying to provide opportunities for the African people to fix their own African challenges. Now, unfortunately, operations in Libya, South Sudan, and Mali over the last 2 years have proven there's always something going on in Africa. Oh, darn. Now, this is just the insanity of this is like the white man's burden. Well, that's these poor black people in Africa. We're trying to let them fix their own problems, but, we just need to step in and shoot some of them in order to help them out a little bit. Cook was one of 3 U.S. military construction officials who earlier this month spoke candidly about the Pentagon's efforts in Africa to men and women from URS Corporation, ACOM, CH2M Hill, and other top firms. During a paid access web seminar, the 3 of them insisted that they were seeking industry partners because the military has big plans for the continent. They foretold a future marked by expansion, including the building up of a permanent footprint in Djibouti for the next decade or more, a possible new compound in Niger, and a string of bases devoted to surveillance activities spreading across the northern tier of Africa. They even let slip mention of a small, previously unacknowledged U.S. compound in Mali, where there was some recent turmoil in the government turnover. Terse sums up some of the activities in the U.S. is known to be engaged in, quote, over the last several years, the U.S. has been building a constellation of drone bases across Africa, flying intelligence, surveillance, and recon missions, not only out of Niger, but also Djibouti, Ethiopia, and the island nation of the Seychelles. The U.S. military now averages far more than a mission a day on the continent, conducting operations with almost every African military force in almost every African country, while building up camps, compounds, and contingency security locations. Whew! The U.S. has taken an active role in wars from Libya to the Central African Republic, sent special ops forces into countries from Somalia to South Sudan, conducted airstrikes and abduction missions, even put boots on the ground in countries where it pledged it would not. Now, why does the American government get away with this kind of crap? Because the American people simply don't care about people outside of our own borders in general. Yeah, sorry to collectivize this, but no, really, this is the problem with the bubble created by the American mainstream media propaganda system. Oh, poor black people suffering in Africa, who cares? Coney 2012. I covered the night, or whatever the hell that thing was. Oh yeah, I came out and I put up posters for Coney 2012. I'm an activist now. I'm paying attention. I care about poor children dying in wars. Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, let's just have a little more military adventurism to help the children. It's for the children, okay? Meanwhile, CNN is preoccupied with its 500th hour straight of the missing Malaysian airline coverage. Fox is busy with its perennial Benghazi conspiracy theories and antagonistic coverage of Russian policy in Ukraine, and MSNBC doesn't dare cover anything but Obama's benevolent domestic social policies. I have to read extra sarcasm into that line, I think. In the newspapers, one can find the occasional report of U.S. missions in Africa, but they hardly question the wisdom or legitimacy of such interventions, and hardly anyone reads the newspapers anyhow. But they sure watch viral YouTube videos that give them a feel-good feeling about helping the kids, even if it results in some crazy lunatic masturbating in the street. Yeah, don't think we forgot about that, Coney 2012. The invisible children all over the sidewalk. Mix this deficient news media environment with the Pentagon's utter refusal to answer straight questions about U.S. interventionism in Africa, and you have a public that is completely uninformed about a growing chunk of U.S. foreign policy that will soon, as it already has, render dangerous unintended consequences. You think terrorism in the Middle East from decades of American intervention there is a problem? Wait till you see what's brewing in Africa. If you've been following the Bundy Ranch story, you might be excited to see that there are militias now talking about continuing the brilliant, righteous, and very important work of standing up to the Bureau of Land Management, standing up to the feds and saying, no, we can, through force, through show of force, through saying we are going to stand up and resist injustice, we are going to resist theft of cattle, killing of cattle, all of the injustices that happen to rancher Cliven Bundy in Nevada, and it's exciting. I'm excited. I think this, and I don't think that the Bundy Ranch incident, was going to be the spark for the next revolution, but it is a significant turning point, at least in this current phase of the American people's attitude to the federal government. But it also kind of reveals something a little telling about those most enthusiastic to take up arms to protect Mr. Bundy. Now, and I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination that was not absolutely righteous. And I know that they are out there now looking for more cases, and we've seen in Texas and Oklahoma various showdowns brewing with BLM where we hope they're backing off. But we know that when it comes down to it, yes, you can repel them in a single incident, but they're going to keep stealing cattle. They're going to, as long as the American people are behind the government as the land, the landowner, making the rest of us tenants, basically serfs, paying rent, Even if if you pay property taxes, you're not an owner. Yeah, really think about that. But I'd like to share this from rgj.com to give a little perspective on the injustice. And this is like, I was really excited that the story went viral. And, at Adam versus the Man, we helped with that. We were one of the earlier, independent media outlets on the story. We had live coverage with Pete Santilli from the Bundy Ranch, or from the BLM land, where they were grazing, grazing their cattle, where there were protests and the confrontation, with his wonderful video of BLM agents tasing protesters. I mean, it was insane. I mean, just pointing tasers. Anyway. Here's a little perspective for you. Nevada tribal leader 81 sues BLM for $30 million. Next, we have a quote from R.T. Fitch, the president of the Wild Horse Freedom Federation, also the co-founder. Quote, "The perversity that permeates Obama's BLM runs deeper than just massacring the last of our native wild horses and burros. They target our Native American brothers as well. Violating constitutional rights is the core of BLM's business plan. The federal government seized Raymond Yowell's cattle, all 132 head, and hauled them across the state and sold them at auction. Then the U.S. BLM sent Yowell a bill for $180,000 for back grazing fees and penalties, and later garnished part of his Social Security benefits." Yeah. Now, I'm not trying to say that Mr. Bundy was not absolutely righteous in everything he did, and people standing up for him were absolutely righteous. But what does it say when the story of the white rich rancher in Nevada is the one that goes viral and gets national attention, and the Native Americans, who aside from being fucked for hundreds of years here, are experiencing today, every day in America, at the same hands, far, far worse injustices? Now, nearly a decade later, the 81-year-old former chief of the Western Shoshone National Council is fighting back. He's suing the U.S. BLM, the Treasury Department, and others for $30 million. He claims the government violated his constitutional rights, broke an 1863 treaty, and saddled him with a debt that he doesn't owe. And you know what? Again, the homesteading about Clive and Bundy, totally legitimate. Been ranching there for generations, and no one was using it before, except maybe some Native Americans. And, he has a legitimate claim as a homesteader to use that property for grazing, certainly. You don't think the Native Americans have a slightly more legitimate property rights claim to some of this territory in America? By the way, this is also happening right near Mr. Bundy's ranch. This was also in Nevada. "There's no other way," said Yowell, a member of the Taymaok band of Western Shoshone who still works a small cattle ranch with his son in northeast Nevada's high desert. As he said, quote, "I kept writing letters to them saying I didn't have a debt with them, that I never signed a contract, but they just ignored it. There's no use talking to them." Yowell said in the lawsuit filed earlier this month he was exercising his treaty-guaranteed vested rights to be a herdsman when he turned his cattle out in May 2002 to graze on the historic ranges of the South Fork Indian Reservation. On the frickin' reservation! BLM officials said the tribe's Taymaok Livestock Association held a federal permit to graze cattle on the public land in northeast Nevada from 1940 to 1984, but had quit paying the fees to the BLM in 1984, claiming the tribe held title to the land. Oh, geez, another parallel with the Bundy story. Imagine that. He refuses to pay for fees to do something that he has a right to do. Despite earlier federal and U.S. Supreme Court decisions against them, the Indian leaders asserted then, as Yowell does today, that the land is still theirs as dictated by the Treaty of Ruby Valley in 1863. Under the treaty, the United States formally recognized Western Shoshone rights to some 60 million acres stretching across Nevada, Idaho, Utah, and California. But the Supreme Court's 1979 ruling determined the treaty gave the U.S. government trusteeship over tribal lands and that it could claim them as public or federal lands. Where's the militia now? I hope this story goes viral. I hope more people realize that as great as the injustice was done to Mr. Bundy, that there are far, far greater injustices going on, and that the Native Americans here are suffering far worse crimes at the hands of the BLM and the United States federal government every single day. All right, we go now to our first guest. Jeffrey, if you would, please. We're going to get Bill Bupert on here. And Bill Bupert is the host of ZeroGov.com and the author of the book by the same name. Jeffrey, we need the camera. So let's see. No answer from Mr. Bupert. Let's see. Do we have a text message from him? New show. Let's see. We got an email from Bill. He is up on Skype. All right. Well, we'll keep trying him. No answer. All right. Well, if you will all just bear with me, let's see if we have some recent callers or recent chats on here who would like to get in on the show. Ashley S. Dark Market by the Dark Wallet guys. All right. Well, let's take a call from Ashley, and we'll see if we can get Bill on here in just a minute.
Hey, Adam.
Hey, how you doing, Ashley?
Good. So, calling in again. Hope I don't do that too much.
No, not at all. Love it. And you know what?
Yeah.
We want this to be like a competitive thing. We get the most hardcore members of the audience who are, you got to get on top of the stack. That's it. Just while if that's where I'm going to go. I'm going to take the callers who are ready to go, because we want people that have video and that have something to say, and you always do.
I'm starting to realize nobody really answers. There's not much to compete with.
Well, no, we have people that will chat at the beginning of the show and then go away, and that's fine. Okay, I can't hold your attention for 2 hours. Sorry about that. Or people have other things going in their lives other than Adam versus the Man. I know nobody's perfect. It's tough, the real world. But that's why we just go with whoever's on top of the stack. And you jumped up right when we needed you again.
Yeah. So, Dark Market. Now, I'm sure everyone's heard of Dark Wallet, or at least the name.
No.
Dark Wallet.
No.
Oh, you haven't?
I haven't even heard. What is this?
Oh, it was this big, I don't think it was on Kickstarter, but it was that sort of campaign.
Okay.
Started recently by Amir Taki and stuff. And basically, the Bitcoin Foundation and stuff?
Of course.
Well, basically, it's a Bitcoin client that's built to be separate from it, and it will have mixing things, laundering things. We can use other terms, but that's basically what it is.
So wait, it's like a Bitcoin anonymizer.
Yeah, well, it's an entire client that's supposed to be more separate from the foundation, have more privacy features, basically. And it's by Amir Taki and several other big names.
When you say client, explain what you mean by that.
Well, it's just like the Bitcoin software. You can receive and send Bitcoins, basically.
And we're talking about, and this works for all cryptocurrencies?
Just Bitcoin, as far as I know. It's they could make a separate one for other ones if they wanted to, but as far as I know, this one will be just for Bitcoin.
Okay. So
anyway, the cool thing, and this is way more important than a wallet, because there's many other wallets, that's what I meant, wallet, is Dark Market, which is an ambitious new project by their group, especially Amir Taki, apparently done in a day at Hackathon, or at least the initial part. Basically, Silk Road distributed like Bitcoin. No central servers to shut down, no stealing going on.
Oh, no way.
I know, right?
Hold on a second. Let me make sure I'm understanding this, because that just hit me like a ton of bricks. You're saying that they have developed a protocol now that basically allows you to have the functions of the Silk Road, that is reputation, anonymity, connection with cryptocurrency, anonymous conveying of shipping information, but distributed in open source like the blockchain? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Giving you some links now so that you can read it or watch it later.
You know what? I'll bet they wish they came up with this before the Silk Road, because nobody would have gotten arrested.
Yeah, I know, right? Well, yeah, basically.
But no one's running it. So Dread Pirate Roberts wouldn't have been able to collect any of his fees for running the Silk Road either.
Yeah. They could have gone off after individual people is what I meant still. That's obviously still a concern.
Yeah, but what this does is this like the great strength of Bitcoin and the Silk Road was, hey, now it's anonymous and it's online, and we're taking all of these deals off the streets. So like for before the Silk Road, if I wanted to buy pot, I had to go meet somebody or find a dealer or something like that, right? Where and in that you have lots of vulnerabilities to law enforcement thugs interfering with your peaceful commerce. And the weakness so huge strength, right? We get rid of all of those vulnerabilities for people who want to engage in peaceful trade that the government doesn't like. The vulnerability there was you still had the central server, you could take it out. Now you're saying all of that's gone. So now we have all of the strengths of the sort of, pre-internet or non-internet drug market or illicit market or black market in general. And, you have all the benefits of it being decentralized and making cops chase down individuals, but you also have all of the benefits that you had from the Silk Road. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, the main problem, though, with all these markets is that it relies on the USPS or UPS or whatever, and of course, right now they don't search every one of those, right?
Right.
But
Well,
they
hold
could
on.
change that
Yeah.
if it gets out of hand.
So it still has that one vulnerability of, yes, you have to physically move something from point A to point B.
Yeah, but
And-
I mean, it could be done better if we had agarist, well, not shipping, but I mean, city to city, people carrying it on, like, personally.
We'll get there. Yeah, personal delivery services. Well, you know
So-
what? You know what? Hey, Ashley,
Yeah.
I'll make you a bet right now. That's going to happen anyway. If this thing takes off, takes off, and the one vulnerability, the one weakness in this entire system to completely evade the drug war enforcers is, and all the other assholes in government that want to interfere with people acting peacefully in trade, the one weakness is the delivery link. And I guarantee you all the next innovation attention will go to that. The funny thing is, though, with all of this happening, eventually, hey, it's the people on drugs who are winning the drug war. They're the other side's given up. They're conceding ground. The American popular sentiment simply isn't there anymore to support the thugs, who had a critical mass of public support before them, and now they really don't.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. And the cool thing is, I think we're starting to get so into drugs now, the movement lately, because of the new strides we're making in Colorado and Washington, that we're forgetting the larger picture. This isn't just for drugs. This is for any goods and service.
Everything. Yeah, no. And what's really important about this is that it means it creates an additional cost to being able to evade government control, but it means once you overcome that cost, you have within that the possibility of a real free market, and that's really exciting. A real peaceful, nonviolent market. People who are able to do things that the government would want to crack down on violently are able to do what they would do without that violent interference.
The biggest thing you can do to contribute is to put that link out, and any viewers who know, I think it's Python and C++, I think it's mostly Python, can contribute to this, because right now it's just some hobby thing. They just put a video out because they're so busy with Dark Wallet. I think your viewers, one thing they could do is step up here and finish the project.
Awesome. So you can contribute to this as a crowdfunder, or you can jump in and help code.
I don't think you can crowdfund it yet. I mean, they're working on another project. This was just a side thing they made. I don't know why they're I don't get how they run, but just give the GitHub link that has the current code. And I watched the video. It is apparently working to some extent. I don't know how much.
All right. Well, the way to support it is to participate, to be a customer, to engage, and to live free. And so we're going to include the link certainly in the show notes today and make sure that we get this up. Thanks for introducing us to the idea.
Yeah, and also I'm going to do my first episode of a Libertarian Transhumanist podcast. To my knowledge, the first one. I mean, I haven't seen any others. And yeah.
Excellent. Well, I hope I can stop in after today's show. I know you're starting this afternoon at 2:30, right?
Yeah. I don't know if anyone else is going to show up, but yeah, so get Mumble working. See ya.
All right. Well, I hope you'll post the link to that on the Facebook page, facebook.com/Adam versus the Man, and then other people can join in. All right. It looks like we've got Bill on the line here. Let's see if we can pull him up now. I'm just looking at his profile picture on Skype. It's very sexy.
Hey, Adam.
Hey, Mr. Bupert. Welcome to the show.
Hey, how are you?
Excellent, excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, join us now, Bill Bupert from some undisclosed location in the Arizona high desert, a fellow military veteran who is far better now in his perspective. Also, as you can tell from the red and black logo, AVTM t-shirt, an old school hardcore supporter of the show. But today we're bringing him on for a very specific purpose to discuss one of his recent writings. And I do want to promote his website, zerogov.com, and his book, Limited Government, Unicorns, and Other Mythological Creatures. Gotta love it. But today we are talking about his 5-part series, Badged Serial Killers, the Growing Murder Culture of Cops. Now, Mr. Bupert, what motivated you? What was really why is this such an important thing for you as a blogger to go and write? I mean, this is there's a lot of work going into this. It's like five long articles and really in depth and really great perspective. Why at this point, you wrote this just a couple months ago. Why at this point in American history is this such an important topic for this kind of broader perspective?
Well, Adam, if I may, I'd appreciate if you called me Bill, because you and I have known each other for years now, and I really appreciate the work that you've done. What motivated me, for the most part, to include what happened to you when you were caged, is that I'm finding this growing trend in the United States in the last 2 decades, especially since 2001, that the police have become an occupying army in the United States. I happen to think there's 19,000 different law enforcement organizations. From the local to the federal level, I'm told there's 89,000 different law enforcement organizations from the local to the federal level. I'm not sure what the number is. What intrigues me the most, though, is that they're becoming much more brazen in their maiming and killing of people. And I'm fond of saying that the police will find you, kidnap you, cage you, maim you, or kill you, depending on your level of resistance. And I know this probably hits home with you, Adam, with your experiences that you've had. But one thing that really struck me is the dog murder that's going on, because it hit a meme that I'd learned in college, and you probably know about this also, which is that one of the markers of a serial killer psychopathy or sociopathy is torturing, maiming, and killing animals as an adolescent. And I asked myself, why is there so much dog murder going on by cops, to include cat murder, by the way, as a subset?
Wait a second.
I'm wondering,
hold on a second. No, I gotta stop you right there. And just to go back for a second, I call you Mr. Bupert because I love the sound of your last name. But I could call you Sir, and you could call me Sergeant if you wanted. Okay, Bill. But no, cat murder. Cat murder.
Yes.
Now hold on, because I've heard. I wish I could say I'm shocked and surprised, but I'm really not, because we've heard of cops killing like terriers, like little 15-pound purse dogs, or like 3-pound chihuahuas. Yeah, mini chihuahuas. It's like, what kind of fucking coward? Just there aren't words to capture the depravity of that. But I've never heard that they've killed cats as well. Can you give me an example?
Certainly, what I would urge you and your listeners to do is to start page, or Google if you wish, cat murder cops, or cop brutality, police brutality, cats. And you will find a number of incidents where they have murdered cats.
I grew up with cats. I don't think I want to do that, Bill. I mean, I
love cats because they're natural born anarchists.
Don't take orders from anybody. Yep.
They don't take orders from anybody. They consider us to be staff, Adam.
Yeah, no kidding. No, compared to dogs that are pack animals. But can you give me an example? Like, is this happening on a house raid kind of thing, or what?
What happens is it'll happen as a result of what they call animal welfare, and I put that in quotation marks. Where you have these armed Humane Society officers and badged constabulary who go about seizing animals because supposedly the animals are abused. And in cases, those animals are abused. But for the most part, what happens is they're remanded to the custody of a kennel, where most likely they're euthanized, or they're killed on the spot. I can't recall the incident per se concerning the cats, but I do know that I included it in part 1 of my series.
Now, hold on a second. Well, I want to go through this. Part 1, dogs and other animals. Part 2, children. Part 3, women. Part 4, the elderly. Part 5, the disabled. And we're going to get into all of these here.
Yes. Okay, great.
This reminds me of, the story that came out of the Bundy Ranch incident, the BLM. Oh, well, we have to protect the desert tortoises, so we're going to have a sanctuary. But when the sanctuary runs out of money, we're just going to kill all the freaking tortoises.
We're going to euthanize half of them, not to mention all the cattle who were maimed or killed by the government-fired rustlers during that time.
Yeah, we have to kill them for their own good. Right. Okay.
Well, they're going to look. That's coming for the rest of us, Adam. That's the plan, because you and I both know, in our belief system, government and politics is a death cult. And ultimately, if you have to die to comply, they'll make you do it.
I want to, before we get into any of the other topics, I think that's an important point to lay the groundwork. And I also want to get into, like you said, the evidence of psychopathy of torturing animals as adolescents. And it seems that along with the American government-run education system keeping people stunted in an adolescent frame of mind. Yes, most cops are extremely stunted that way, emotional cripples and adolescents in many ways. And this is not all cops, but there's certainly a distinct trend there. But government and politics is a death cult.
Yes.
I think a lot of people are going to hear that as exaggeration. What's your response?
Here's my response. I wrote an essay called Political Science is a Death Cult. I was a political science and political economy major when I was in college back in the old days. Here's what you got to ask yourself as a thought experiment, Adam. If you get in front of a political science professor who is not Murray Rothbard, and you ask him to speak on anything about politics, what he will do is he will give you a very sophisticated academic rationalization of the threat or use of force and violence to form society.
Yeah, of course. So
it's what they do.
Well, can't you have a coercive government that forces people into X, Y, and Z behavior and not kill people? How is that? You're making a leap to call it a death cult, aren't you?
I don't think I'm making a leap for this very reason. The only reason that we would be free, Adam, the ultimate litmus test for Adam Kokesh and Bill Buford to be free is the ability to opt out of anything that doesn't harm other people.
Right.
Which means that when they try to impose national socialist healthcare on me, and I say, you know what, I don't want to be a part of that, and I don't want to pay for it. When they try to impose taxes upon me to pay for the war effort that you and I had the misfortune of participating in, and we say, no, we don't want to be a part of that. If you can't do that, you're a slave. And we know throughout history, all slaves are subject to the ultimate punitive punishment of being forced to death, if they wish, by their masters. And that's what the American government does. I mean, the American government doesn't only kill Americans, it kills brown people all over the planet.
Right, okay, because they're owned. And then to take this to the concept of government more broadly, government is based on the collective having ownership rights over the individual, which ends up being the string pullers and the powerful and the oligarchs being able to claim ownership over the rest of us poor slaves.
Indeed, Adam. And I've seen you do many a savvy video with the man on the street, especially when you were covering Occupy Wall Street, where you would put them in a conundrum where you would force your interviewees to acknowledge that, yea and verily, I must use violence to form society, but I'm using violence in a fashion in which I love my fellow man. Right.
Okay, so to the mentality of the officers, you said that this is a sign of psychopathy, torturing animals as adolescents. How does that relate to the current state of law enforcement, and how is that attitude either selected for or institutionalized and encouraged?
Well, number one, what I want to dismiss is there's no such thing as a good cop. Many people, they're surprised when I say that, but how can there be a good cop when you and I see so many YouTube videos from other sources, so many anecdotal stories, and I would tell you these are all underreported and non-reported as far as the total number of deaths imposed, much less maiming by police across America. But what it comes down to is that if you have good cops, why aren't those good cops policing their own ranks, pun intended? Why aren't they doing the right thing by either reporting to the news media, going to internal affairs, going to the chief, the commissioner, saying, I'm not going to stand for this anymore? It doesn't happen because all those guys have gone out of the force. The entire thin black and blue line is all about protecting the guy to your left and right, and this should sound familiar to both you and I, Adam, protecting the guy to your left or right, whether he's right or wrong. And in the end, especially when it comes to policing, that has a very corrosive and cancerous effect on liberty.
Okay, well let me challenge this, if I may, going through this.
Please do.
Could there be a good cop, perhaps at a local department where maybe there's only 2 or 3 dudes and they all know their community and they're all they do their best to serve what we would consider real justice based on self-ownership and the non-aggression principle. They don't enforce laws that are in violation of that, but they say we want it. This is what we want to do to serve our community. The community sees it as a legitimate service. They understand that their tax collection for their salaries is not righteous, but it's the system that the community accepts, and all they do is good work, and they never violate that. They never cross the line. Could a group of cops in that scenario, because it couldn't possibly be one by himself or herself, right? But if it was, say, a group at a local level, at a unit level that actually met all those criteria, that those cops would be good cops.
Adam, I don't mean to be flippant on your show, but that's an Andy Griffith Mayberry RFD script, but it has nothing to do with the reality today. And the reason I say that is that when those cops are asked to do bad things, such as seize weapons, support the drug war, or make sure that men and women are arrested for selling raw milk in California, or maybe they've sold tangerines for less than the FDA determined diameter that you're permitted to sell them on the open market for by the DA and the FDA, then you're going to get arrested. And what does arresting mean? Arresting means kidnapping, and kidnapping is violence. And that's what, absent police, no bad actor in political history, whether it's George Bush, whether it's Obama, whether it's Stalin, whether it's Chairman Mao, whether it's Alexander the Great, none of them could do anything if they didn't have their military forces and they didn't have their police forces, more importantly, domestically, to deprive people of their freedom and liberty. Police are the existential threat to freedom and liberty for mankind in global history and today.
Okay, so you're saying that it is hypothetically possible under today's system for there to be good cops, but it's effectively impossible and realistically doesn't exist.
I couldn't say it more eloquently, Adam.
Okay. All right. So moving on then to this mentality, what is it that got us to this point? Where correct me if I'm wrong. And in talking about this earlier in the show, I think what I described was that over the last several decades, and maybe you could go back to the 60s with this, to the Vietnam War era protests. But I would think even more, and maybe that was just the kernel of the start, when you had U.S. Marines actually marching against protesters. You had National Guards troops shooting students at Kent State. You had, and people said, oh, no, can't do that. But the government said, well, we still need means of control. More resources go into other domestic law enforcement that's non-military. But is there also seems to be, just over the last maybe 2 decades, a different trajectory, an uptick in some sense, and even in the last maybe 5 years, a much more dramatic uptick in militarization and in legal precedent eroding in terms of police accountability. Does that rough timeline kind of square with your understanding of how we got here today?
Adam, that's a real good thumbnail sketch of the last few decades, but I would suggest to you that it's written into the constitutional DNA of America to be this kind of repressive and violent governmental organization that's an umbrella over the entire country. In 1850, when they passed the Fugitive Slave Law, Marines and police were used to escort one kidnapped slave from, it was either D.C. or Maryland, back to his slave owner in the South. And that continued through the 50s up until the War of Northern Aggression. I would also suggest that when we look at World War I and the number of protesters who said, we have no business in a European war, what does Woodrow Wilson respond with? He responds with the American Protective League. I would urge your audience to look that up on the net, or maybe they have a book on that subject. It was awful. They jailed, they beat, they criminalized, they closed down newspapers. If you were an anarchist, a war protester, a conservative, an anti-imperialist, whatever the case may be, they would jail you. You look at what happened to conscientious objectors in both World War I and World War II. But if I fast forward from World War II to today, I would say this police cancer has really metastasized and taken a lethal militaristic hold since 2001 with 9/11. But one can also look at President Nixon inaugurating the war on drugs in 1971 and 1972 with the formation of the DEA, And the war on drugs allowed the police, like the IRS soon glommed onto, allowed them to make every human transaction in America transparent because we could be doing something wrong.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate that historical perspective. I mean, if anything, my understanding was really shallow without that broader perspective. So you're saying this has always been a feature, that this has been, would you say it's been coming and going, or it's following some kind of, larger, longer term trend that we should be concerned about?
Adam, I would say it's been coming and going, but as you know, I'm a constitutional skeptic who doesn't hold that parchment in very high regard whatsoever. And I think it was one of the most clever and diabolical propaganda devices to make people think they're free when they're actually enslaved.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also tell you that what we're seeing today is a result of the technology leverage that the government has at their disposal to make transparent every human transaction, especially electronic today. Now, does that transparency work in the other direction when it comes to the government? Of course it doesn't. You and I both know that. And we've seen, in this being Bush's fourth term, you see that Obama does nothing to change any of that.
Yep. All right. So let's get into the series here. Part 1, dogs and other animals.
Yeah.
Why do cops shoot so many dogs?
Gosh, there's a documentary coming out, Adam, called Puppycide. And they did a Kickstarter campaign in order to examine this very thing. And I asked the producers to examine this little meme that I uncovered. And I'm not taking credit for this, but I just noticed that, is there a connection between that adolescent serial killer psychopathy? You call it psychopathy. I like that. Or their sociopathy. Mm-hmm. Is there a connection between that and the behavior that they display today? The behavior that I see displayed today by cops seems to have no regard for the kind of decent behavior that you would expect of your friends and neighbors, or that you would commit against your friends and neighbors. And it also sparked a thought in my mind when I had a brain zephyr, and I thought, can immoral means actually come to moral ends? And I'm of the mind, looking back historically, that when you use immoral means, you will not achieve moral ends. You must use moral ends to achieve moral means to achieve moral ends. In this case, the cops do things that you and I would never dream of doing to other human beings, but they do it on a daily basis. I think they become so almost anesthetized to their brutality, so used to their brutality, and it's become an expectation in their ranks. I would urge you, Adam, and the rest of your audience to go to Police One. Now, Police One is probably the largest pig gathering platform on the net. Read the comments of all the news that they broadcast during the day, and read the comments from the police commentariat, from all the rank and file cops out there. You will be horrified. It will make your hair stand on end.
This is policeone.com?
With the kind of attitude they have about us.
Policeone.com?
Yes, I think that's it.
And it's like a non-government, just sort of community website and forum?
Yeah, it's a forum. Apparently, it's one of the largest on the web.
I'm surprised I've never heard of this, and I feel like this is going to be very juicy source of material for Adam versus the Man.
Well, as a matter of fact, Adam, I've told my friends it'd be great, and maybe you could find somebody who could do this, somebody who could cherry pick really nice comments on a daily basis and provide them as an insight into the mind of a cop.
Oh man, this interview is getting scary. I don't know. I don't know if I can make it through 4 more sections here. All right. Children, try me.
They cuff them, they tase them, they beat them, they wail them, they push them against walls, they pile drive them, they pile on top of them, they strangle them because they've been riding a skateboard in the wrong place. They do all this vicious stuff to children. Now, I can't recall whether Jesus was 17 or 18 when this happened. But there's one incident where this young man is cuffed with his hands behind his back. He's in the back of the cruiser, and he just so happens to have a gun on him and shoots himself in the head. This is according to the police report. Shoots himself in the head with the gun that they had not found before they put him in the back of the car. By the way, 2 items of interest. Number 1, the caliber of the gun matched that of what the police were using at the time. And it just so happens that the dash cam and the entire audio video surveillance suite in the cab of the police cruiser was not working during that time. Jesus Huerta, I think that's his name. They can look it up. All this is documented, of course, thanks to the the sophisticated audio video technology we have out there.
I don't even know what to say to that.
It's horrible. It's just horrible. But that, and Adam, you know this from having been in a cage yourself. I'm convinced that there's severe underreporting and non-reporting of police brutality going on. You've probably seen this number around the web.
Yes.
Go ahead.
No, please. I agree, and I wanted to point out earlier that you mentioned when you mentioned the underreporting, and that is such a huge problem. But even with the underreporting, with the government numbers, you're still 8 times more likely to be killed by a cop than by a terrorist. And if they probably included all of the numbers that could go into that, it could be 2 or 3 times that easily.
So I dug into those numbers, Adam, because you and I have both seen where on the web it says between 2001 and today, 5,000 people have been killed by cops more so than terrorists.
Right.
I stand a much greater chance of getting bitten by a great white twice and struck by lightning twice at the same time before I am the victim of a foreign-born terrorist incident. There's no doubt in my mind. But if you examine that number 5,000, there's a study out there. You are aware that the federal government does not track police-related shootings, whether they result in a wounding or killing of civilians. Now, there's a professor who was very interested in this, so he started studying it. And he found through anecdotal evidence that the number he came up with was 1,250 to 1,300 times a year somebody is murdered by the police. Now, when you multiply that number by 13 years...
hold on.
Go ahead.
I gotta, on behalf of the skeptics in the audience...
Sure.
Explain murdered here, because it could be, if you want to count Huerta's death as a murder, that's one thing. But what about incidents where, you tase a guy and his heart stops and the tasing was justified? Are you counting those? Are you counting cases, where it's accidental and in the moment the actions of the police were legitimate and tragically accidentally or, in some unfortunate circumstance created by a non-police officer led to someone's death?
For the sake of argument, let me suspend it and believe that what you're saying is correct. But here's what we have to keep in mind, Adam. In 2013, according to the statistics by the police themselves, 151 officers died in the line of duty.
Okay.
That's out of 1 million badged status thugs who are currently in the line of duty. 1 million. They stand a lesser chance of being injured in the line of duty than truck drivers do, which is the number 1, and loggers, I think, is number 2. They're not even in the top 10 of occupations that are dangerous. And here's the thing. Of those 150, 50 were due to vehicular accidents, and you know what happens with high-speed pursuits.
It's because cops are crazy, irresponsible drivers because they have no accountability.
Thank you. Yes.
Duh.
Thank you. And also, Adam, that's because of qualified immunity, police unions, and this penchant of the prostitutes and the media always giving them the benefit of the doubt for their privations.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is that when you look at that, only 50 of those deaths in that year, and by the way, the police say this is one of the least fatal years for cops in decades, 2013. Of those, only 50 are the result of them being engaged with criminals in either bludgeon instruments, firearms, or some other type of weapon that took a cop's life. So we look at the ratio, and let's suppose we cut the number in half that I just came up with, which is 1,300 a year. And we cut it to 650 a year who are murdered by cops. And by the way, my definition of murder is murder begins where self-defense ends. In this case, let's say it's 650. That is still 13 times the number of cops who are killed in the line of duty.
Mm-hmm. And so it's not self-defense at that point.
I think it's a great unplumbed number. And Adam, here's where you can speak to it. The thing that I can't get information on is the cage, from the local to the federal level. Inside the correctional facilities, I'll bet this dark face of madness, maiming, violence is much worse than what we see on the streets.
I mean, I wish I could say I experienced, some particular incident and could testify to that, but I was very protected by my own celebrity while I was in jail, and everybody knew who I was. Excellent. And that if I got messed with, that there was, plenty of attention on the case. And even with that, I suffered relatively petty abuses of groping and, privilege being messed with and, things like that. But I just got to step back for a second because when you were telling me all of this and you mentioned my own record with civil disobedience, people go, oh, Adam, that's really brave of you, and I think, oh no, it's not brave. I have confidence in my calculated risks, and I know what I'm doing, and I take a calculated risk, and I believe that the benefits are worth it because I believe in freedom, and I believe in the value. I believe so much in the value of the message. I believe so much in stimulating thought in people and in the value of that value outweighs the risk. And then I hear all this, and I'm like, holy crap, did I miscalculate? Was that really like... And I don't think it's brave or cowardly. I really think that's the wrong way of looking at it. But damn, maybe some of that shit was stupid. And there, you take a lot of risks, and maybe having cameras there, provides some measure of safety. But, most people in their incidents with the police don't have that kind of accountability. They don't do what I do when I'm able to go and confront police in public or to protest and know that I've got cameras following me around and protecting me in that sense. But to get to your question about, what happens in the cage, we do hear stories about this, Bill. There are cases of rape by guards, and to me, this is absolutely fucking insane. That you have, you take away everything else that the government does, that you have cross-gender guarding. That is just an invitation for problems, and they don't care. They want the problems because it's more of an excuse for more government spending. And I had females guarding me. I had females patting me down. And I of all the things that I experienced, if you're going to be in jail for 4 months and do 2 months in solitary, getting a pat down by a female guard groping your nuts, is a little bit is really a slight insult to injury. But I take back what I said earlier, because while I didn't experience anything really much more bad than that for myself, I did witness the way a couple of fights were dealt with. I did see inmates getting slammed into walls. I saw people punished for specious reasons of petty personal stuff, like a guard doesn't like an inmate on a personal level and then sends them to the hole, or batters and bullies them. There was one guard in particular that, I wrote a letter to the warden about and made copies so that other inmates could sign and send it in to try to get her fired or removed, who was just, this particular prison guard was really, I felt sorry for her. But, you start when you're in that environment, and this was the last block I was on in jail, and she was working a regular shift. We would see her for, I think, 12 hours a day, 3 or 4 days a week. And this woman would, some of this I can only say, I have secondhand stories of her having sex with inmates. One who said that he nearly did himself. And this was someone that I trusted. I think it's a pretty credible story. Not that big a deal, but that she would go, and she had a boyfriend, and she would call her boyfriend. And this was a woman, and it was so painfully obvious. And like I said, I really felt sorry for her. Even in asking for her to get fired, I was like, I hope she gets the help she needs. This was someone who was like sexually abused as a child. And you could tell by the way she related to men, both other guards who were men and inmates who, of course, I was only with other men for inmates. And she would go and abandon her post to go use the phone to call her boyfriend, and was always in horrendous relationships. And I experienced this with her for, about a month and a half. But, I have a sense from my experience of the environment, and of course now millions of Americans have shared that wonderful, government-induced, taxpayer-funded spiritual retreat experience that I got to enjoy. So this is not, my experience is not special in any way, but I certainly can appreciate the circumstances. And when you talk about, how out on the streets, police are able to evade accountability, well, guess what? Behind closed doors, it is way, way worse.
I can just imagine, because you have the institutionalized rape culture in there, that the cops on the streets give the wink and the nod to the young perp who may be facing jail time, saying, yeah, you're going to be such and such as roommate. And so, no one would tolerate that in a free society where you were threatened with rape as a tangential punitive penalty to the sentence you get in the first place. I'm anti-death penalty. And I think that the number of innocents who have been on death row, the number of innocents who I consider to be in jail in the first place.
Right.
Did you know, Adam, that there's 1,300 people who have life sentences who did not have a violent crime conviction? That they were
Wait a
victimless
second.
crimes they were convicted of, to include a man in
No.
Louisiana for shoplifting?
Wait a second. You're saying a guy is currently on death row? There are 1,300 currently on death row?
I said a life sentence.
Oh, life sentences. I'm sorry.
Yeah, 1,300 with a life sentence across America, according to the ACLU and Amnesty International, who have these life sentences as a result of victimless crimes, one of which is a man in Louisiana who shoplifted a jacket. 3 strikes, you're out, and now he's in for life.
Wow.
How does that, from a much less a moral perspective, how does that pan out from a cost-benefit analysis? It simply doesn't. You know, we have 7.5 million human beings, highest per capita prison population on earth, from the local to the federal level, probation, parole, and in cages. 7.5 million human beings, which is 3 times the peak raw data level of Stalin's political and crime gulags in the USSR.
Just got to let that sink in.
It's horrific. America has so many lopsided statistics like that, but it's horrible.
Well, you know, that's why I'm really glad to have you on to do this and to have this conversation, to promote your writing, because very few American intellectuals have done the job that you have of bringing the proper perspective to this. But I want to just to get back on track here. Section 2, children. Certainly. We were talking about that, and you rattled off a lot of these, you know, specific acts that we've seen. But can you talk a little bit about sort of the more systematic, institutionalized, legal framework type issues that specifically disadvantage children?
Absolutely. And here's what it all comes down to, Adam, is government education. If you get government education and get government out of, they call them public schools, but they're government schools, get the government out of education, because when you go to these prison sites that are parading as schools, they have uniformed police, they have school resource officers, they have DARE programs that turn all the students into snitches, and they have government civics classes, of course, which is nothing more than government obedience classes. And what they're doing is the same thing that TSA and all these other 3-letter agencies do, which is it's imperial conditioning, Adam, for you and I and the rest of America to be obedient cattle. That's what this is all about. And like Hitler said, give me your child at age 5, I'll have him for life. That's why the government wants them in the schools in the first place.
So, from a legal framework, though, what are the unique challenges that you face as a minor in America today, just on the street dealing with law enforcement? And you know, the skateboarding is not a crime is kind of the obvious one, but you know, talk about the lack of accountability, please, and really what happens that in the legal process? What are the incentives, and what is it that really uniquely disadvantages children in those one-on-one interactions with officers?
Well, number one, you shouldn't talk to the cops, and you should instruct your children not to talk to the cops. I have some business cards made for my children, and I give them out to my friends that details my telephone number, my wife's telephone number, and our attorney on retainer's telephone number. All our children carry that in our wallets, and all of our friends who have them carry them in their wallets. When the police encounters an adolescent or somebody under 18, they should hand them the card and say, I'm not comfortable speaking to you from this moment forward. I'd like you to get in touch with my parents. Mm-hmm. But I wish to say nothing more right now. Now, what's going to happen is most of the cops are going to threaten, badger, intimidate. They're going to say, we're going to arrest you and all the rest of it. You simply have to train your children well, where if you speak in front of the police, it's not going to go well for you afterwards. So you shouldn't say anything to them.
Except, am I being detained? Am I free to go?
Thank you for that.
Right.
Exactly.
No, and if your kids don't have a card, or you get to avoid that, if you can keep them from even having to give your phone number to the police, because guess what? That makes you that guy in your town. You're the guy who wants to train his kids to be free. Oh, well, you're a target now. You don't want you don't want the government to control their minds. Well, you're okay. You can be that guy. But yeah, am I being detained? Am I free to go? Kids got to know that too. And there's an extra. What I was hoping you would touch on, though, is that there's an extra intimidation factor. And it's true about adults as well. That they're the ones with the guns and the ability to use them with impunity. They're the ones that don't have accountability when they shoot people, whereas we as individual citizens, we are supposedly held accountable through the legal system, but cops are not. And so when you, as an adult, go talk to a cop, there's that inherent intimidation. Then that if there's any dispute, this guy has the whole gang of thugs and the whole court system and everything else behind him. But for a kid, there's the extra intimidation factor of maybe as a kid. First of all, there's the size difference. If you're a smaller child, and we take this for granted as adults, that just like, hey, guess what? You're looking up at someone that's twice the mass as you, or if they're half your height, like 4 times, 16 times, whatever. Just the physical power that they can exert over you, not counting their firearms, but also the intellectual bullying that police are trained in. And it works against adults who don't recognize it, who aren't trained in it, who don't understand verbal bullying, who don't understand how to deal with threats, who don't understand or who don't have the wherewithal to think on their feet and say, to analyze what is the credibility of this threat. And cops sucker adults all the time, but I think in that regard, children are especially easy to suck in on with this kind of bullying that cops do.
Adam, I think you're 100% correct. And what happens too is that we have a certain infantilization that's going on today with the last 3 generations growing up, where with the electronic leashes, the lack of cogitation, the addiction to gaming, the addiction to what Harlan Ellison called the glass teat, whether that's a computer monitor or TV, whatever the case may be, people's cognitive skills are starting to decay. Boston Tea Party, Kenneth Royce, just came out with a new book, first volume of 3 volumes, Modules for Men, in which he's trying to go back to the old notions of manhood and how men become men. When you turn to the back of his book, what's on the back there is 2 images. One's a 23-year-old major in the Royal Air Force in his aircraft during World War II. The other one is a 23-year-old young man in his pajamas who looks like a nerd off of one of those sitcoms that people would see on television, who looks incapable of maybe walking his way out of a paper bag, much less knowing which end of a gun is which. I really think that there's a lack of maturity that the government incentivizes in the schoolhouse through college, where they take away accountability and responsibility. That speaks to what you're talking about.
Yeah, and then one other thing I want to point out in regards to children is the particularly devastating effect of the Supreme Court precedents that has said cops can lie on duty. They have no responsibility whatsoever under any circumstances to you as a citizen to tell the truth. And for a child, you talk about the negative impressions. You talk about the gullibility, the vulnerability. You're an authority figure. Society has given you a badge and a gun and these special privileges, and now you're telling me that I'm a scumbag piece of shit because I'm skateboarding on the sidewalk. And that's just so much psychological trauma and stunting done not just by institutional education, but at the hands of individual police officers interacting with children.
Sure, but don't you think, Adam, that at least the Supremes gave an imprimatur to what the government does on a daily basis?
Oh, yeah. No,
it's ironic that they would admit that in order for them to rule and govern other people in a moral fashion the way they see it, they must lie to us. I think it's a great admission to see.
Now, and to be fair, like let's being academic and intellectually honest, separate this from, say, free market or nonviolent public safety services. There are circumstances where lying is okay and justified under very, very specific circumstances. And again, as an individual citizen, it's okay to lie to government because they've always got a gun to your head. So,
Amen.
So if you have to lie, like lying in itself is bad, is wrong if you have no reason to, but if it's to prevent an obviously greater wrong, if someone has a gun to your head and says, I'm going to shoot you if you don't tell me where the treasure's buried, tell them where it is, even if you don't know, absolutely. And I think, they never separated that at all. They didn't even try. And this is to underscore your point that this is in order to carry out this racket. as it is, and that's the translation of what the Supreme Court said. We have to give them carte blanche. They can lie whenever they want. They have never the one exception I suppose they made, and even here it's never enforced, is when under oath in a courtroom. But even then, you never ever see a cop getting held accountable for lying in court, because the judges and everybody else in the system needs them to be able to lie
their
in
ass
court.
off in court.
Yes, absolutely. All right, so to the next section, women.
Yes. So it's I have a 19th century notion of how women should be treated, which is much more chivalrous than the 21st century notion, I think. But nonetheless, despite that, when you have a 200-pound man pummeling, maiming, injuring, punching, tasing, handcuffing young ladies and women out there. There was one incident, as a matter of fact, that I'm sure that you and your audience both saw. A woman is caught on a DUI. She's brought into the station, and she's making a racket at the door of the cell that she's in. One of these thugs rushes in, body slams her into the concrete shelf that acts as a seat in this cell. He body slams her head into it. She has to get extensive plastic surgery to remedy what happened. And one thing I wonder, Adam, with all of this violence that is being committed against women, to include tasering pregnant women, you saw recently, I think it was in New Mexico. New Mexico has a good track record right now. In where you hail from, there was a van full of kids and a mom who were so terrified of the police stop, they drove away, and the police opened fire on the van with full knowledge that children were inside. But of course, this happened at Waco in 1993, where the BATF, the FBI, and all the other three-letter agencies who participated did not confine their fire to windows and doors that had positive identification of targets, but they perforated all the walls, knowing that there were
children
both women
inside.
and children in the compound. I mean, if that doesn't tell you what you need to know about the moral measure of these buzz-cutted, jackbooted, badge thugs, I don't know what will.
Well, there's the other institutional problem. We touched on this earlier, of men guarding women in prisons and in jails.
Agreed.
And when and this is something I can really testify from my personal experience, is that as a guard, you have, within the confines of those circumstances, absolute power over inmates. If you can walk into a room with no cameras and just a man and a woman in a room with no cameras, where the circumstances are, when the man wants to leave, he can leave at any time. The woman has to stay there. She has no recourse, no power whatsoever. You are inviting rape. You are inviting abuse. And we've seen, over the last few years, I think really just a handful of incidents that have come out. But every time they do, it's like, oh no, there were these two guards that just went on a fucking rape spree and raped every woman that they felt like in that facility because they could. And then you have to wonder if those are the ones that got caught, and you go, well, how did they get caught? And it was only by some weird coincident circumstance that some woman was able to bring that out and get some evidence out and have a rape kit done or something like that they were caught, and that other women came forth. And how many women didn't come forth, and how many women across America are experiencing that every single day and have no recourse and no way to even speak out about it. And they're just, lives destroyed, psyches shredded, women driven to despair and suicide. And really that's just one aspect of the disadvantage that occurs here. But, I'm pretty optimistic. I like to describe, obviously I'm, an optimist overall, but I like to describe myself as a libertarian feminist. And by that, I mean very specifically that I believe in, equality in humanity, and that gender does not in any way affect your entitlement to self-ownership. But even more than that, I look forward to, in the evolution of a voluntary society, a more peaceful society, that the advantage that men enjoy because of their physical dominance is going to be less and less relevant. And I hope that it becomes a mitigating factor in this. But obviously, we still have a long way to go here.
Well, guns certainly diminish that inequality between men and women. So if you have armed women
Yes.
They stand a much greater chance of keeping intact those things they consider most sacred to themselves. I would also urge you and your audience to take a look at what happens to women in the Oklahoma penitentiary system in particular. They've had a raft of stories in the last couple of years in which things have just been bloody awful there. But if we look at the treatment of women, and please, I know that this is going to sound a bit chauvinist. If we look at the treatment of the most innocent, whether they are children, whether they are women, and I hope women don't take offense at that. I'm not calling them weak. I'm saying that in some circumstances, men can take advantage of them in a way that they shouldn't, and they do, like you just described in the penitentiary. It is the measure of a society's morality in the way it treats its most innocent, exposed, and vulnerable individuals. And if the police are that measure today, and the police are the armed measure of how our government conducts itself, our government is barbaric at best.
Oh man, I don't know if I can take this. Part 4, the elderly.
Oh, it's awful. It's just awful. I tell these stories, and I try to confine all the stories that I related in my articles to the last year, not the last 40 years, because if you look back far enough, you'll find them. There was a recent incident in Texas, and this was one of those rare incidents, by the way, where the police seem to have been sorry for what they actually did. They stop a man in a pickup. I think he's 70-something years old, and he gets out. He goes to grab the cane out of the back of his pickup. As he does that, the officer shoots him. The officer felt a tremendous amount of remorse on scene, which I found rather rare in looking at these videos, because
they're trained not to.
Ones.
They're trained. No, the training and conditioning is self-preservation. This is why, as you pointed out, there have been so few cops dying in the line of duty. It's not even in the top 10 most dangerous professions. And of course that the government wants us to fillet cops as this, these noble people taking this great risk to deal with dangerous criminals. But no, I mean, it's really important to point out that people bringing us essential services like wood, a lumberjack is, it's a riskier job than being a cop. But no, specifically to relate to that and the remorse, and the reason why they don't feel that remorse is that they are conditioned and trained to say, okay, well, there was a threat to me, and if you're the long arm of the law, if you're the embodiment of the will of the people, if you're all of this other bullshit, then if you are threatened, you are defending the people and defending yourself. You are defending the state. You are defending righteousness. So when an old man goes for a cane, a cop can say, well, he might have been going for a weapon, and he should have known better to not do that when I told him to hold still. And
I felt threatened.
Right, I felt threatened. The slightest threat, they take it as a threat to the entire institution behind them, and they're propagandized to think that represents the people. So I just want to say that to point out why it is a rare and surprising thing that a cop actually shows and feels remorse beyond its propagandistic purposes of making people feel that they actually care about them.
I agree, Adam. And what's interesting too is that, and this really raised the hair on the back of my neck when I researched the series, was the number of cops who laugh after they have maimed or killed an animal or a person. To me, that takes it to the next step of psychopathy.
Well, hold on. Before you comment on that, you got to back that up. Give us the data. Where are you getting this?
Okay, if you look at my dogs article and look at my disabled article, and you will find 2 distinct incidents in each one of those in which the cops were caught on videotape laughing or making light of what they had just done to the person or dog that they had attacked.
All right.
There was one recent one, as a matter of fact, that wasn't included in my series, where they shot a pit bull, poor pit bulls, I think for the most part, they have been unjustly maligned as a breed. Mm-hmm. A breed doesn't make a bad dog. What makes a bad dog is a bad owner.
Yep.
But in this case, the dog had a collar on, and the cop just took a shotgun to the dog and blew part of the dog's head off. I hate to be so coarse for your audience. Mm-hmm. What he does is he turns to his partner and he says, I paraphrase, wasn't it cool the way his collar flew off when I shot that dog? It's just monstrous, Adam. That kind of behavior is just monstrous. And I think it is the tip of the iceberg of what they say out loud, what they're probably saying in their own sick internal dialogue as cops.
Oh, man. All right, so back to the elderly, please.
Sure.
The physical disadvantage is obvious, but what are the more systemic consequences of that?
the systemic consequences are what you'll find is that in half the cases, they're there on a home welfare check in which a nurse, a doctor, or somebody in elderly administration, whatever the case may be, considers them a harm to themselves. Well, in the process of being a harm to themselves, the police have cuffed them, tased them, beat them, and even killed them. There was the incident in the VA in the last year in which a 95-year-old man in a walker was shot dead. There was a 90-something-year-old man who was in his bed with a pistol at his bedside from which no rounds were expended, who was shot to death in his bed because the cops were frightened. You know, I don't know if we can talk about it, Adam, on this show or another one sometime in the future, but this whole officer safety mantra, people don't realize how dangerous that is to the sanctity of their friends and family for that to exist. We've got to do everything we possibly can to intellectually and ethically beat that out of existence, because officer safety is probably one of the number one reasons the police get away with what they get.
Well, I think it's also important to point out to anybody who hasn't thought this through for themselves that it's calling the police needs to be, less than a last resort. And it is really tragic that this is where we have come to, because the government has a monopoly on these services. And when you do need help, when you need someone to apply force to help you out legitimately, the only people to turn to are government police officers. And we've seen, as you point out, it's health and welfare cases. I've seen the video from, the cops' body cam where there's a guy coming at him with a knife. And it's a guy who's deranged, he snapped, and he needs help, and he's got a knife. Oh, well, he's coming at me with a knife. I'm just going to shoot him.
Exactly.
If you want, and it would be so nice for society to have legitimate service providers who can do that, who can intervene in those situations, who can help someone out when they have become a threat to themselves or others. And we don't have that. And this is one of those places where, mutual aid organizations, local communities, just owning a gun yourself. Even if it's not a gun, and obviously I'm not allowed to own firearms right now. And to the extent that I respect the conditions that have been placed on me by the government because of the various special threats that I've let myself be open to. But I carry pepper spray, and I think if I've made a video about this where I got my girlfriend pepper spray and a taser and had her try them out on me, and I think it's really important for people to take responsibility for themselves. But if you think about it, if you're in a situation like this, say you've got a family member who's out of control and you call the police, what are they going to do? They're going to come and hurt them. Are they going to shoot them? Not necessarily, but these are the people that you're inviting into your home to deal with this threat. And I'd much rather take the risk, unfortunately, of having to deal with that myself. Of if I have to pepper spray or tase a family member who's out of control and detain them myself, as horrific as that sounds. And of course, there are situations when that's necessary, sadly, but it's such a better alternative if you are capable of it than calling the police in.
Adam, how many videos have you seen of private security and mall cops maiming, killing, or otherwise abusing the citizenry?
Yeah, I can't
it
even keep up with them.
Happen.
They're like the videos that turn your stomach. They're out. There's new ones every day.
Yeah, there is, but mall cops can't do that because mall cops,
yes,
when they go to work every day, their entire life's paycheck and beyond is bonded and insured against themselves, not against the taxpayers.
Right.
Jose Carreño was gunned down here in Tucson, Arizona. His wife got a $3.4 million wrongful death suit settled. Where's that $3.4 million going to come from? It's not going to come from the police. It's not going to come from the police unions. It'll come from those poor, burdened taxpayers in Pima County.
Well, to be fair, and I really don't want to endorse this mentality, but I want to say they get what they deserve. When you fall for this, when you don't think, and I had a big stack of economic stories we're not getting to today about people of your generation and older having to move back in with their parents. It's not just college graduates that can't find a job. It's the baby boomer generation even going, now crap, now we got to move in with our parents at this age. And it's like, sorry, this is what you get for voting for Democrats and Republicans for all the past decades. This is what you get for falling for the racket. This is what you get for turning to government. All of these things that we've talked about so far today, all of these consequences, once the government said, once people demanded accountability to government through voting, which we know is generally a sham, it's an ex post facto excuse for the superclass to do everything that they were going to do anyway. But once
it's an advance auction for stolen goods.
Yes, but once the people participate in that to the extent that they do today, the people at large are absolutely complicit, and de Tocqueville got it right when he wrote in Democracy in America, and it's true about any other system, but he said, in a democracy, people will get the government they deserve.
Good and hard.
Yeah. All right, so part 5, the disabled.
The disabled, what you'll find is children with Down syndrome and older people with Down syndrome, retarded folks, whatever the case may be, those who are mentally challenged or handicapped in a fashion. I couldn't believe the number of stories, Adam, that I found. And of course, this is anecdotal, but there is some hard data out there on how many disabled and mentally challenged folks there are in the penal system, for instance. As a matter of fact, I think if I recall the number, there's been something like a dozen mentally diminished or handicapped folks on death row in America in the last 2 decades.
I got 2 stories I want to share, if I may, about that. There was a story. It was recent, about a year ago. Cops went to a theater where a man refused to leave because he was mentally handicapped. He was Down syndrome, big gentleman, and in the process of just removing him from the theater, they ended up killing him. And you're like, how the hell does that happen? But because they know, aside from the removal of accountability, these are people that won't fight back. Someone like you or me, who military background, who has that poise and confidence. It's like, who do muggers go after? They go after the guy who's shuffling his feet and got his head down and looks vulnerable. That's who they go after. But what you said about prisons, when I was in jail, there was a guy who was attacked by his niece, who was on a bad PCP trip, and came after him with a fire poker, and he stabbed her with a kitchen knife and killed her in self-defense. And he ended up taking a plea to some lesser charge other than murder, and it didn't have an agreement for a time for the sentence, which is really just this. You think about it from the state perspective, right? Okay, so you committed this crime. If you admit to this and you save us this trouble, we'll only send you to jail for so much time. And that's the way we think of plea bargains working. Well, in D.C. and in a lot of other places now, that's just off the table. It's just, no, plea to this charge and, roll your dice with the judge. This guy got 14 years. He was a former boxer, was borderline retarded, and he, I was helping him write a letter to the judge and could tell, like, helped him say what he was going to say, but he was barely capable of that. He got 14 years, and he was at the jail that I was at in D.C. His cousin was also at that jail, but because he got sentenced to 14 years, he got transferred to a federal facility. We found out a week later he committed suicide.
It's just awful. What makes me really reflect on, if there's a redemption point to this, Adam, and this isn't much of a redemption point, it's the fact that how many Einsteins, Michelangelos, great novelists, great artists, great statesmen, whatever the case may be, how many have been ensnared in this huge prison planet population that we have in these United States since the end of World War II? How many people have we put behind bars where we've completely ruined their lives, where after 5 years they get out, and they're lucky to get a minimum wage job because a record is the sign of Cain in American society, and you're not going to advance very far. I just wonder how much farther would we be as a society. Less government would be one consideration, Adam, but less the number of people that we've had in cages. If they were free to be the productive citizens they wanted to be in a more free society, how much farther technologically and artistically advanced would we be as a Western civilization? It's a rhetorical question, but I think it beggars belief.
And it just you try to. I mean, in my head, trying to wrap my brain around the cost of the police state. It's impossible.
Yes.
You can't. You simply cannot fathom how much this has held society back, America back. I mean, as we have a particular perspective on, but the world is in this same mentality. This is not unique to the United States of America. Yes, the current police state and the militarization has some unique features, but this is a global trend of modern statism. This is a feature
Absolutely.
of the uncontrollable growth of government. And as you described it so well earlier, the death cult of government and politics is now institutionally in this spiral out of control where the police state really is a global phenomenon. We could talk, we could go for another hour about the global war on terror and the American government's, the way that it militarizes police in the United States at the behest of military-industrial complex contractors who simply want more guns and more tanks and armored vehicles and ballistic shields and riot gear and all this other crap sold. That the American government is also promoting this through the American empire throughout the world. Why do you think when I was in Fallujah in 2004, they were hiring Americans to come and train Iraqi cops? They're bringing the same destructive culture. When they say we need to train the Afghan security forces to police their own country, this is what they are talking about, instituting the American standard of law enforcement, and it is so pervasive and it is so sick. And I just want to turn the conversation for a minute to solutions. And I know that we've talked about on the show lots of particular individual things that people can do in terms of protest, in terms of fighting individual cases, in terms of recording police, in terms of getting the most egregious offenders fired. In fact, and there is one great bright spot in this whole sordid story in America today, and that is the personal camera technology that is being employed, where we've seen, and Jeffrey, you remember the statistic, right? There was one department in California where they instituted personal cameras for officers, and complaints about brutality fell, what was it, like 80, 90%? Something like that?
It was 80%, Adam.
80%. So complaints about brutality, 80%, just because you're able to do that. And I think the surveillance state is a terrible thing, but a surveillance society of accountability for violent criminals has its benefits. And here we have, a way that you can fight at a local level by, asking for specific policies that are going to reduce the amount of violence and coercion in society. And we do our best on the show to promote activists who are doing that kind of work. But with you here, I want to talk about the alternative and how this relates to statism as a whole, when a lot of people will hear this. And I hope that there are people listening right now and who are going to hear this later who are statists, whether they're mainstream, just moderates or liberals or conservatives or conservatarians who think, well, they call themselves libertarian, but they still think a government monopoly on certain services is essential, which essentially makes them conservatives and not libertarians. How do we divorce people psychologically from this paradigm, in the sense that a lot of people will hear this and go, well, that's too bad, let's reform the system. And we say, no, this is endemic to the system. This is inherent. This is in its nature. The only way past this is to figure out a different way. And by the way, we figured it out. What is that? How do you address that conflict that I think a lot, this, excuse me for asking this question in such a drawn out way, but America is asking this question right now. America is going, we have this problem. People aren't ignorant of this. Even as suppressed as these stories are and the statistics are, people know that we have a problem because it affects their lives. People's daily lives, the quality of life is reduced because of the police state, because of their relationship with law enforcement, their relationship with government as enforced by officers on the streets in their costumes with guns and badges. So how do you address this, someone who says, well, yeah, that's an unfortunate consequence. We got to have a better system.
Well, Adam, I'll say first off, I'm not a libtard. I'm an abolitionist by philosophical inclination, which means that I think that all government is bad. But I do live in reality. My wife constantly insists that I live in reality. So here are my semi-statist solutions I would have. Number one, stop the federalization of the police and get the federal government out of all laws that they don't belong in, which is 85 to 90% of what they're in right now, to include guns and weed, to include drugs of any type, and make it local, make it state, so that you have competing market environments of law laboratories to see what works. Number two, get rid of qualified immunity and make sure that every cop, when they step onto the line during that day, their salaries, their livelihoods, their pensions are on the line for the rest of their lives for their behavior in the next few minutes in which they may wish to maim or kill somebody. Number three, get rid of police unions. Number four, don't allow status government employees to unionize at all, because it just has awful consequences for everybody from both a moral and a consequentialist perspective. The other thing we need to do is make sure that the Pentagon and the military stops giving so much shit to the police. They don't need MRAPs. They don't need armored vehicles. They don't need to blouse their boots. They don't need to wear the silly buzz cuts. They don't need to carry military weaponry. They don't need to do what they just did in Boston this year and inaugurated in Boston last year. What they need to do is they need to go after malum per se laws, which are laws in which Adam and I agree are wrong. For what I'm saying is crimes.
Real crimes. Crimes by definition of violating someone's rights or property.
Thank you. Malum prohibitum is where the government comes out and they say a tangerine below the following diameter in the state of California is illegal and punishable by fines, caging, maiming, and killing, depending on your level of resistance.
Yeah.
Or if you don't surrender 40% of your raisin crop to the U.S. Raisin Federation, they're going to come and seize your property.
Okay,
or
Bill,
if you don't surrender your cattle to the cattle rustlers.
I gotta stop you there though, because those are great ideas. Those are great, steps forward that would reduce a lot of these specific problems that you talk about. Yeah. But I think we're much more likely to see the abolition of government as a whole and an establishment of a peaceful society before we even get those reforms. Which are we going to do first? Are we going to get a free society, or are we going to elect an honest politician? I think we're much more likely to overthrow the system entirely or see its collapse and localization and atomization before any of those bigger picture reforms are enacted, as great as they may be for increasing quality of life and reducing this kind of violence. What is the alternative, and why should people take this not as motivation just to fight the police, but fight the state?
Adam, I cannot mention on your show for both the legal consequences it would have for both you and I what I think the ultimate solution is. So I'd rather defer.
Well, perhaps then I should step in with my more peaceful solution, that is my presidential candidacy in 2020, with a peaceful, orderly dissolution of the United States federal government to continue down to the local level until we reach the divine individual. But I believe I know what you're talking about, which is what any red-blooded American man with any sense of justice wants to do anytime they see one of these sick, dickless thugs beating up a protester or hurting an innocent elderly or disabled person or shooting a dog. And I know exactly what you're talking about.
Indeed.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, Bill. It's been a pleasure. It's been fun. It's been funny. It's been painful, shocking, full of surprises, better than an orgy. And I really appreciate you coming on the show today and giving us this most important perspective. I hope people listening to this share this for people that might still have their head in the sand about the American police state.
Adam, it was an honor to be on, and thanks for everything that you do.
Ladies and gentlemen, Bill Bupert, the website is zerogov.com. Please check out his 5-part series, Badged Serial Killers. And we're going to stay on Skype here for the last 10 minutes of the show. I assume we've got some chats, and I know we've got some people who want to respond to that amazing hour we just had with Bill Bupert. So let's get into this. Ashley, with a follow-up, wanted to point out that he forgot to mention Dark Wallet is Cody Wilson's project. Very cool. That's Cody Wilson of Defense Distributed, who recently, I think there was saw a story just somewhere and some linked on some random website of him pointing the plastic gun, and the caption is "Happiness is a 3D printed gun." Yeah, I think that the word he used to describe it is uncontainable, and that's certainly what we see with all of these innovations through technology today, like dark wallet and the dark market. All right, John Snafu Edom just writes, longtime fan. I guess is that, I don't know if that's someone who wants to call in, but you got to do better than that. Let's see, Dave. All right, this is excellent. Dave writes, Bill's spot on with the state being like a death cult. He has very similar traits to one, that's for sure. Thanks for bringing him on. Wage slaving it at the moment. Can't do any calls, unfortunately. If I may ask, is there any chance of getting an audio-only stream going? That's a great idea. Maybe that's what we need for mobile, is if you pull it up on mobile, you get it with audio only. We'll look into that. That's a great idea. I'll bet there are a lot of people that would want to listen live audio only. How did we not think of that? Isn't that what the rundown is doing? Is that why you're promoting them? Because they're ripping just the audio. Oh, okay. Well, we should have that on adamversustheman.com/live as well. We'll talk to Michael about that, but I don't think that'll be hard to put a separate either player in underneath, or maybe for the mobile version, just have the audio. I think that would probably be a lot better for most people on mobile who are paying for data as well. So Dave, thank you so much for the suggestion. All right, Josh sends a link. Oh, Police One. Oh, this is great. All right, so we have someone who already found us a link from the website that Bill mentioned, police1.com. So let's pull this up and see what we got here. I'm excited about this. I should have known that there was such a website, right? You would think, Jeffrey, that, of course, there are going to be police community forums. So here it is. Police investigate gun activists' armed park video. Oh, wow. This is from July 5th, 2013. Gun rights activist Adam Kokesh posted a video to his YouTube account threatening a final American revolution from rawstory.com, and it's got the video. I don't know if I want to get into this on the air, having never seen this, but thanks for the link, Josh. He says, well, I guess we should get to the comments here. Well, actually, so here's the first comment here. Well, they served a warrant last night. When are they going to arrest David Gregory for his brandishing of a 30-round mag on NBC's Sunday news program in D.C.? Well, at least the cops want to screw everybody equally. That's kind of nice. Now, there's actually some debate here. It seems, dipshit or not, his action, loading a firearm in D.C., is 100% protected by the Second Amendment, as it is anywhere else in the nation, shall not be infringed. It's so easy to understand. I have to wonder if this is like a website where police are having this conversation, right? There's got to be some infiltrators. I would hope maybe some liberty activists can get in. This would be a fun project, right? Be the lurker at police1.com, reaching out to the really egregious ones, or inserting some ideas of justice and liberty into the conversation. Okay, this guy is an idiot, just another part of all the other idiots that think it's a good idea to sling a rifle or shotgun and go to town thinking they've got some kind of cause. You mean like a fucking police officer walking around with a gun everywhere he goes for the cause of law and order and justice? Yeah, that. Yeah. I'm not necessarily agreeing with Kokesh. I think his position can be made in better ways, but how do you get a dark sports coat equals a Goodfellas jacket? I own a couple of dark sports coats and certainly don't think of myself as a Goodfellas gangster type of person. I'm a retired police officer, and I certainly see this administration as oppressive and constantly making attempts to circumvent the Constitution. Consider for a moment that these so-called libertarians have some valid points. Obama and his type are not a friend of law enforcement. All right, now this is good. It's encouraging to see that there are retired police officers with a little perspective, bringing that to their junior, perhaps more aggro counterparts. But I think I'm going to have to go through police1.com and do a search for my name and see what other interesting stories comes up. Josh, thanks for sharing that link. We're going to get into that. All right. So I really don't know where to go after all of that. It's just, I hope you appreciated and enjoyed the conversation that we had with Bill Buford. I certainly did, and understand now why we spent that much time with him, because he really does bring an incredible depth of knowledge and just an amazing perspective, having researched so thoroughly. And he has a way of just telling it like it is that, I can't help but respect. But we have time for one more story. This is a fun one. From the Huffington Post, almost 100 hate crime killings linked to one website. Report. A white supremacist site has blood on its hands. According to a new report, Stormfront.org is linked to close to 100 killings in the last 5 years, the Southern Poverty Law Center found. From The Guardian, the white nationalist web forum Stormfront.org says it promotes values of the embattled white minority, and its users include Anders Behring Breivik, who killed 77 people in the 2011 massacre in Norway, and Wade Michael Page, who shot and killed 6 people at a Sikh temple in Wisconsin, 2012. Now, yes, there are problems with racism, and Stormfront.org is not a website that I'm looking to endorse here by any stretch of the imagination. But let's take a look at HuffPost's coverage of this for what they're really trying to do with this story. Because if there was one website where people happen to breeze through, and yes, I understand there's something to this story that Stormfront has a role in, but the SPLC said, quote, "It's pretty clear that websites like Stormfront are breeding grounds for people who are just enraged at their situation. It's there that people find the reason their lives aren't as they had hoped, and Stormfront helps them find the enemy that is standing in their way, whether it be Jews, African Americans, immigrants, and so on." Now, I've actually been on Stormfront.org myself, and know that there is a lot of anti-authoritarian sentiment. And this is actually very accurate at capturing this one particular dynamic of the disgruntled. Their lives aren't as they had hoped. And the question is, can you find the enemy that is standing in their way? And when people are disadvantaged, as they are so badly by government, we have a whole stack of stories here, as I mentioned, on the economic situation in America today. Temp work becoming a way of life. Moving in with parents becomes more common for the middle-aged. The American middle class is no longer the world's richest. 86 million full-time private sector workers sustain 148 million benefit takers. Guess who makes more than bankers? They're regulators. That's right, averaging $190,000 at the FDIC. You think, yeah, of course, there's some disgruntlement. And yes, when people are so miseducated by the American government public indoctrination centers masquerading as schools, they're going to be vulnerable to the kind of persuasion to say, well, maybe it's about race. And race is certainly relevant in all of these issues. And I'm not saying that racism is I'm not excusing racism in any way here, except of course in the intellectual abstract sense that we're all racists and we all judge people by superficial means. But they go on. Unfortunately, it's not very surprising that people who live in this kind of stew of violent racism eventually pick up a gun and do something about it at some point. Fair enough. But Stormfront also does a lot to direct people's angst where it should be, against government. So the problem here is that when anti-government becomes governance, and we just have to make this really clear, if government is controlling people by force and violence, and essentially the threat of force or the threat of violence, then if you are killing someone or if you are stealing from someone, you are governing them. Let's be really clear about this. What makes the state evil is that it uses force against peaceful people. That is governing. That is what government is. When you kill someone, you are the ultimate form of government for that person. You are saying, I own you and it is time for your life to end. When you use violence against someone, you're saying, you don't own you, I own you. When you take their property, you're saying, I own that, not you. That's governing. That's what government does. NBC News reports that Fraser Glenn Cross, the man accused of killing 3 people in 2 Jewish community sites in suburban Kansas City on April 13, was barred from Stormfront because of disagreements with the site's founder. The report calls it the murder capital of the internet. SPLC's research shows the site typically only gets about 1,800 visits a day, half of which are people outside the U.S., but the site has a core group of very active users, and Stormfront's bias-related murder rate accelerated significantly after Barack Obama became president, the report found. Earlier this week, CNN reported that in America, people who follow far right-wing ideologies have been responsible for more killings than Islamic extremists since September 11. Now, we have to explain the left-right continuum in order to understand why the Huffington Post, bastion of liberal bleeding hearts that it is covering this story the way they are and trying to say, oh, no. See, violence when it's used for good is good. Violence when it's used to do things that we disagree with, oh, then it's bad. And so they're trying to feed into this bullshit understanding of the left-right paradigm that, oh, well, if you're on the right, you're anti-government. But that's not what they're talking about here, because if you're going out and killing people, you are the ultimate form of governance. And so they want you to think that all of this, racism, all this it's right wing. Well, there's two ways of looking at the left-right wing spectrum, right? You could say, well, the far left is total government, communism, complete control, totalitarianism, whatever. You go to the far right and say, well, if that's the case, then the far right is the opposite. It's zero government, non-coercion, total peaceful, voluntary society, as I am as a voluntarist libertarian. That's what I want. I am the extreme right wing by that definition right here. Welcome to the show, yes. But by the common definition, what they want you to think is the left-right spectrum, and this is why the whole thing is so meaningless, is that people on the left want to use violence for good, people on the right want to use violence for bad. And that's exactly really what is at the heart of understanding the way that we talk about liberal and conservative. They really are the same thing. It's not more government or less government, any of that superficial distinction. They are all saying we want government, we want violence to organize society. It's just a matter of how we apply it. They are all part of the death cult of government and statism and politics. CNN notes that according to account by the New America Foundation, right-wing extremists have killed 34 people in the United States for political reasons since 9/11, whereas terrorists motivated by Al-Qaeda's ideology have killed 21 people in the United States since 9/11. Now, there is someone who weighed in on this as an approved community political pundit, Jim L. on Huffington Post. He says, that's the worst thing anyone can do to anybody else. Treat them for stupid. People aren't stupid. They may not be as educated as you or as fleet of mind or as glib of tongue, but to equate that to being stupid makes you stupid. Really? So you're treating me, the reader, as stupid now? Okay. Now, we've all seen enough movies and read enough novels and seen enough TV specials to understand that bedfellows don't necessarily have to sleep together in order to produce evil offspring. Oh, so your worldview comes from movies and television. Great. Okay. Maybe that has something to do with your detachment from reality. I submit, now here's, again, you want to get to the crux of this. Why is the Huffington Post covering the story? I submit that the Republican Party and white supremacist groups in this country are just such bedfellows, and I want to take this opportunity to express my indignation over being treated by them as something less than whatever it is they feel they are over and above me, but especially for being treated as too stupid to get it. No, but Jim, you are too stupid to see that all of this left-right paradigm bullshit is feeding into the violent system of government, and all of the motivations, whether it's racism or the bleeding hearts or the control freaks or the punishers or the law and order types or whatever the case may be, the military adventurist American imperialists, you're all part of the same political government death cult. And Stormfront.org is a really pathetic target for you to go after in trying to make such a weak point. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us on the Adam versus the Man podcast. It's been a blast. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. And, well, let's see. What else do we have to say? Send your love mail, as always, to adam@adamversustheman.com. Cool, huh?